Hey guys, today I wanted to try something a little different on my channel. I recently picked up this old cornet from a flea market for $40. For a price that low, it was a steal. I originally intended for it to just be a wall ornament in my music room, quietly living out the rest of its days next to my old trombone and saxophone without actually being used. But then I thought, wouldn't it be awesome if I could not only learn to play this thing, but also restore it to a bit of its former glory? Well, that's what we're going to be working on today. Using tools I already own and only buying the replacement parts I need online, I'll show you how I went from this to this and outline all the steps along the way as to how I transformed this antique. The first thing we need to do is assess the damage to the horn, and I can quickly see why this cornet was only running for $40. There's all kinds of damage to this thing. It's in really rough shape. First off, the finger hook snapped off almost as soon as I brought it home. There are a number of bracings that have snapped and been haphazardly repaired with what appears to be some kind of epoxy. I'm completely missing the water key, aka the spit valve, the spring and holder, and a pad for the third slide spit valve. The buttons are extremely sticky, and the mouthpiece appears to be fused to the lead pipe. Not only that, but the lead pipe is horribly bent and has evidence of a nasty drop. The bell has a dent as well, but there's not much we can do about that. There's also this little screw holder piece. I'm not really sure what it's for, but it broke off as well, and thankfully I still have that. All in all, someone clearly felt this cornet was good for nothing anymore, and probably had the same idea as me, to sell it as a wall decoration for a bar or music room. But when I was surveying the damage, I found the serial number for this cornet. It's a Reynolds Medalist Series cornet with a serial number starting 29, which a quick Google search reveals that it was most likely made in the 1970s, probably around 1974. This is an almost 45-year-old instrument. Pair it with my 1958 Reynolds valve trombone that my dad played back in school, and now we've got an antique brass section for future videos. How awesome is that? Well, I guess first we need to get this thing playing before I can actually use it in any videos. And man, this is bad. I don't really play brass instruments too often. I grew up a clarinet and tenor sax player, but this just sounds terrible, even for a non-brass player. We've really got our work cut out for us this time. So the first thing that we need to work on is trying to repair all of the dents in this lead pipe. Now there's a few methods to do this that you'll find online. The most DIY version involves pouring water into the lead pipe, sealing off both ends, and putting the horn in the freezer. In theory, the ice should expand outward, pushing out the dents and imperfections, but it's also extremely easy to rupture the lead pipe in this way if the ends are sealed too tightly. In addition, my cornet has a few holes and won't actually hold water very well. Most instrument repair shops use a series of tools that pull smaller and smaller metal balls through the lead pipe until the entire thing is the correct diameter. These kits, unfortunately, are several $100s. So I did the next best thing, and I bought a series of ball bearings off Amazon. They were like $7 or $8, and I attempted to force them through the cornet with my cleaning snake. It worked pretty well, though I did end up getting a few stuck and had to force them out the back with compressed air. I also tried ramming a few in with a stick of wood to smooth out the curve. This, combined with a set of pliers to squish and shape around a stuck ball bearing, helped smooth out the worst of the dents, but it also roughed up the outside pretty badly. But we're going to fix all that later, so don't worry too much about it right now. With the dents mostly smoothed out, it's time to give this thing a proper bath. Who knows what kind of junk 40 plus years of playing and sitting have left in here. First, we take all the valves out because they have felt components that can't get wet. Then we remove all the tuning slides and the mouthpiece and dunk them all in warm, soapy water. Next, we take our snake, which I bought a few years back when I restored my dad's old trombone, and slide it in and out of all the little nooks and crannies. This part took a while, but as the water started changing colors and I saw all the junk coming out, I knew it was getting good and clean. And check this out. Look at all this nasty junk floating around in the water now. This is all 40-year-old corrosion, dirt, oil, God knows what else. I can't believe I put my mouth on this thing. The other issue I found is that there are a few small holes in the metalwork. The soapy water helped me figure out where a few small air leaks were. This is a technique a lot of professions use to find small holes in pipes and other lines. Putting soapy water on the leak will cause bubbles to form, and it shows you exactly where the leak is. Next comes the fun part. I ordered all the replacement parts I needed off of eBay, and then it was time to attach them to the cornet. In order to do that, I needed to use plumbing solder and a small butane torch to reattach everything. The way to attach pieces to a brass instrument is the same way you would solder copper plumbing. First, you burn off any excess solder from before. Next, and after it's cooled, you sand down the area to give the solder some small grooves to settle into. This increases the surface area and allows for a much better hold. Next, you apply flux, which helps to draw the liquefied solder into the gap. After that, you heat the solder and the joint until the solder begins to melt, and then you place it in between the pieces you want to attach. The flux should pull the solder into the gap and then solidify, holding the metals together. In theory, that's how it's all supposed to work. Now, I'm no metallurgist, and I've never soldered metal like this before, so I had a bit of difficulty with this part. The biggest issue was that I needed one more set of hands to hold everything in place, because in one hand I had to hold the solder, and the other hand I had to hold the torch, so there was nothing actually holding the piece together. A video I watched on how to solder suggested using twist ties to hold the pieces together, as they're metal in the middle and can withstand pretty high heat. The other issue I ran into is that brass conducts heat incredibly well. Brass is actually an alloy of two metals, zinc and copper, and one of the properties it retains from copper is that it has a very low specific heat, meaning it heats up incredibly quickly and the heat spreads down the frame. Parts of the cornet that weren't even near the part I was soldering got hot very quickly, and I did minorly burn myself a few times. Luckily, my wife has an aloe vera plant growing that she's taking care of, so I had plenty of relief for the burns. I took to the internet for some inspiration, and I saw several designs and color schemes that interested me. I decided to go for a copper, silver, brass color scheme. The main valves would be brass all the way up the middle, and the silver parts would stay silver, but all of the other parts I wanted to make copper. Now, there are a few websites that will show you how to electrolyze metals to plate them with whatever metal you want, but this generally involves large quantities of sulfuric acid and dangerous electrical currents. So we're going to go to the cheap, easy way. Spray paint. The first thing we need to do is tape off the areas where we don't want the paint to go. Now, I started filming this process thinking it would make a great time lapse, but after 20 minutes, I knew it was going to take more time than I had memory on my phone, so I stopped recording it and finished. It took about an hour and a half, but here's the finished product. Trying to get the tape in all the little gaps and around all the bracings was a colossal pain in the butt, but it is all worth it in the end, I promise. Next comes the part that's hard on the sole. In order to achieve a better stick for the paint, we have to sand down the brass parts and intentionally put deep scratches in the brass. This will help the primer to actually adhere to the brass instead of sliding off of it later, and the sanding is arguably the most important step. It also isn't a bad idea to clean the brass with isopropyl alcohol, which will remove any dirt and debris that would prevent paint from sticking to the brass. Next, we can grab our spray paint. Be sure the primer that you use is a self-etching primer. The primer has a small amount of an acidic solution in it that actually etches the brass. It's similar to sanding, but on a much smaller scale, so the two together do a great job of getting the primer to hold. For the actual copper color, I use this Rust-Oleum metallic finish paint. There are a lot of copper paints out there, and some are clearly better than others. For this project, I'm going to apply 9 coats of paint, 3 coats of primer, 3 coats of copper color, and 3 coats of clear coat as a protectant. Remember, with spray paint, you have to spray outdoors or in a well-ventilated area. You don't want the air to be too cold or too hot, as this will affect the paint's ability to stick to the object you're painting. Hold the can about 12 inches from the object and go back and forth in light coats. I can't stress this part enough. In order to get a uniform look, you need light coats that don't pool or run. The only way to achieve this is to go back and forth in a sweeping motion across all of the angles, as you can see me doing here. Start spraying on one side of the object, sweep across it, and stop spraying after you're completely clear. Otherwise, the paint will run. Avoid spraying one area too much, work around from different angles. This is why I like the 3-coat method. The first coat just lets you make sure you're hitting the object from all the angles, but it doesn't cover every little space. The second coat's a bit heavier, making sure to cover up most of the areas you missed with the first coat. The last coat is just making sure you actually got all the areas completely covered with a good layer of paint. I typically wait 2 to 3 minutes between coats and 10 minutes between different paints. All in all, the process typically takes about an hour from start to finish. I hung the cornet with a bent coat hanger that went through the middle of the second valve so I could hit it from all angles. And now that we're done, we need to take it back inside to dry. Usually, I let the paint dry for a bare minimum of 24 hours before I do anything with it. In the meantime, there's something else we can work on. I saw a few designs for custom buttons that sit atop the valves on this cornet, and I decided on using a circle of red oak that was stained a brownish red color. I think it'll really complement the brass and copper colors of the new cornet. But first we need to get these old plastic buttons out, and there's really only one way to do this. Now, on a more expensive horn, these would probably be made out of something fancy like mother of pearl or some other expensive metal, but on these cheaper horns, they're usually plastic or colored glass. A screwdriver and a hammer usually make quick work of the inside, and then we can start cutting out the button inlay. I bought a cheap piece of red oak from Home Depot and hacked off a rough square with my jigsaw so that I could sand it down. Now, I don't have a stationary sander, so I'm going to do this the dangerous way, laying my belt sander on its side and holding the oak with my fingers. This was quite tricky, as getting a perfectly round circle from a block of wood is difficult as it is. Somehow I managed to not scrape my fingers on the sandpaper as it went around, and I worked out the shape of the button, checking it every so often to make sure I hadn't gone too small. Once it was about the right size, I hit the button with a hammer to make sure the wood was set deep inside. No glue required. Now to sand down the excess wood. I put the button in my vise, being careful not to crush the threads that actually thread down onto the valve. Then I ran the sander across the top until it was level with the top of the button. Next we need to stain it, and I still have some red-brown stain left over from my wood wall project. Just a few drops to soak in, and then we let it sit and clean up the excess. It takes a few hours for the stain to set, but I can work on the other buttons until then. Check it out, guys. Look at how awesome this paint job looks. Look at all the detail. Taping up those bracings was totally worth it. All the new pieces are installed and functional, and check out our new custom wood buttons. They look amazing. All we have to do now is put the valves back in and screw in the buttons. I've got plenty of oil to oil up the valves before they go into their slots. The oil will help lubricate and clean the valve as it moves, so sometimes a few test wiggles are required to actually spread the oil around. The only other issue I had was that after putting the buttons in the vise, a few of the threads must have gotten a bit squished because the buttons were hard to screw in, but after some effort, I got them into place. And now look at this thing. Check out how good it looks. The saying really is true, the devil's in the details. The custom buttons, custom paint job, and just general cleanup have totally transformed the look of this Cornet. I love the copper bracings on the silver parts of the pipes. It looks amazing, and it means that taping around all of those bracings really paid off in the end. Here's a look at the before just for reference, and here's the after again. It's a whole new instrument, but remember how our goal was not only to make it look good again, but also for it to play again? What kind of repair job would this be if the Cornet still sounded like garbage? With all the new parts installed, let's give it a listen. Okay, that sounds so much better than before. As I said, I am not a brass player by trade, so I'm sure someone with a proper embouchure could come along and wail on this thing, but the overall tone of the Cornet has improved tremendously. I can't wait to start playing and recording with this thing. Guys, if you like this video, please consider subscribing and leaving a comment to let me know your thoughts, as well as a like on the video itself. Be sure to check out the rest of the videos on my channel, which is more music recordings. Most of what I play is jazz or blues in some way, but I've also got some piano covers as well. Drop me some suggestions for what to play next, and I just might make a video of your suggestion. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.